So the patterns I'll discuss here today are based on some of those experiences. Stephen mentioned Barclays. The same patterns have been established in a number of other organizations now at scale across 15,000 colleagues, that sort of size approach so far. I'll be talking for about 20 minutes and then we'll open up for discussion. So the anti-patterns that we'll talk about, and when we talk about an anti-pattern, by the way, this is simply referring to a headwind, as Stephen said, a headwind, some of the challenges that folk experience typically in organizations at the moment. And some of those patterns are around lack of psychological safety within the safety organization. We'll talk a bit about that. Some of the anti-patterns are around role-based safety silos operating quite separately from business areas. And some of the anti-patterns is around having a fixed mindset to risk, as we just talked about. So a standard templated approach for thinking about risk. And thinking then about the patterns, we're looking to move to a more safe environment for colleagues to work in psychologically, to reorganize around the value stream, and to rethink the process and approach we use to operate our governance, risk, and compliance processes. So from anti-patterns to patterns. So the language here isn't around don't do that, do this. It is, in our experience, those things on the left are typically headwinds. Those things on the left, on the right, can be tailwinds to help you get started. But every context is a bit different, and you will always need to apply and think in your context, does this work for me? And it can be that in some cases, an anti-pattern can be a useful thing in some cases. So it's not binary, but the whole theme of Soon and Safe Happier, the book, is to try to share the patterns without being too prescriptive. So this is shared learning based on experience. So does anybody remember this image? You don't want to call it out or put it on the channel? So this is obviously an exploding oil rig. It's Deepwater Horizon in the Gulf of Mexico. Thank you, Martin. 2010, where 11 people lost their lives. So on the day of this disaster, Transocean executives were extraordinarily on the rig, celebrating 6 years without any lost time incidents and injury-free. So celebrating that this was a safe rig on the day it exploded. And the question then arises is, was it safe? Was it a safe rig? And was this a freak accident which no one could have foreseen? Or actually wasn't it? Was maybe there a culture of not reporting incidents, of bad news being buried, and of systemic weaknesses building up and not being resolved? And ultimately, the accident was therefore far worse than it should have been. And the investigation that looked into this concluded the latter. Now, this is a very dramatic image, but it's no different in a financial services context, in my experience. Data leaks are the new oil spills, whether you're a government tax department or a bank or a hospital. And when I've spoken to compliance officers, some of the comments I get back is, well, when things go wrong, it's a witch hunt. The ISO 9000 series says that we should learn from errors, but we never do. Okay, these are statements to me from compliance officers. Another one, head of regulation. I've seen the most extraordinarily long approval trails that are utterly meaningless. So how we manage risk, how we approve risk, how we think about risk, and the same challenges can emerge. And the pattern here is to achieve more safety within safety. So more psychological safety. And Professor Sidney Decker, based out of Brisbane, describes this perhaps in the most eloquent way I've seen. He talks about the difference between success and failure is not in the absence of negatives, it's in the presence of positives. So what does that mean? Well, some of the negatives Sidney Decker talks about is the things that we typically find when we do a root cause analysis of what went wrong. There were human errors. The guidelines weren't followed. There were miscalculations. We take comfort in following the process, and a traditional governance, risk and compliance model will check that the process has been followed. What Tekla points out is that if you look at the things that went right, if you look at the incredibly successful events that happened, whether they're moon landings, whether they're hospital operations, you see the same things present. You see human errors, you see guidelines not followed, you see procedural violations. And these things on the left here are not the cause or success or failure. The people, the things on the left here are the human dimension, and humans are not the problem. It's this point. Humans are part of the solution. So what are the positives here? You know, these positives, readers of fearless organizations, for example, Amy Edmondson is a go-to topic on psychological safety, the go-to sort of author, really. You know, these things on the right are the human dimension that helps to manage risk. So the ability in a team to challenge that status quo, to always say stop without fear of personal reprisal. The awareness that in a complex environment, past success is never an indication of future success. That there's diversity of opinion and that's welcomed. It's not just the hippo model of the highest person's opinion counts. So those things on the right, the presence of those positives is when we talk about safety within safety. We're looking for those things, and ultimately it's your people who will keep your organization safe. So I'm not going to go into more detail right now around the kind of leadership behaviors which can foster that climate, but the takeaway message from our first anti-pattern pattern pair is that when reimagining risk and control, start with your culture. This is primarily a cultural program. Within your governance, risk and compliance organizations, there is a cultural program that is needed, in my experience. And that the reason for those extraordinarily long approval trails is because there is not the ability to challenge the status quo. There is not an acceptance of diversity of opinion. Okay, so thank you. So that's the first pattern, anti-pattern pair. So now let's talk about reimagining your organization in governance, risk and compliance. So typically we see these departments as heavily siloed, they're specialized. You'll hire information security specialists, you'll put them in a single department. You'll hire data privacy specialists, you'll put them in a single department. And there'll be anti-money laundering. And there will be fraud. And there will be enterprise architecture. And you'll have a number of different silos here, and there can be thousands and thousands of people in large enterprises working in these different, so we broadly are referred to them as safety roles, governance, risk and compliance, we refer to as safety for simplicity. Now these silos, some of the challenges you have here is that when you're then trying to support change, when you're trying to enable change to happen, those folk enabling change are needing to navigate really quite a complex environment. So when I've put a stopwatch on a Hello World application, okay, a 2-line piece of code that is from code complete, and we timed how long it's taken to navigate all these silos to production live, to get to production live inside that organization, so zero risk. However, there is a process that needs to be followed. And the process takes you through these different silos. And in each silo, there is a front door to be found, may not be obvious. There is a form to be completed, may be extensive. The different forms may be duplicative, but that's the model, that's the process. And when you finally get through to somebody, when you've waited in the queue, you've filled in your form, you've been sent to the back of the queue for filling in the form wrong, you've done it again, then you'll have a conversation. Obviously, there's no risk, so you proceed. So in my experience, we ran this on the scale of stopwatch, took 3 months elapsed for a Hello World application to move into production. And that was around with 20 man days or so of project management effort supporting it. So from a change point of view, navigating many role silos is not a recipe for going fast. The handoffs force you to go slow. And from a safety point of view, these folk are challenged. This is not optimal. Each of these departments is challenged on capacity. They've never got enough people, and they're stressed because they're not sure where the risk is, and their role is to try and manage the risk. And so they're working on their own, trying to navigate an organization that's much larger than them to find out where the risk is and trying to contribute. So the pivot here from role silos is towards long-lived, multidisciplinary, cross-functional safety teams. So this is drawing on the organizational models that we see emerging from agility thinking, drawing on those patterns and applying it to governance, risk, and compliance. And when you start assembling cross-functional safety teams, so a team of individuals who have all the skills in them to guide a value stream based on on the risks and the compliance and the governance that they need to think about, that long-lived team can actually start helping each other. So the enterprise architect actually has a very good understanding of the data governance requirements. A data governance specialist has a very good understanding of the data privacy requirements. Anti-money laundering person has a pretty good feeling about some of the fraud challenges. So their domains are not separate. Their knowledge is not separate. It all overlaps. And if this team is trying to operate more productively, they can do a lot to help each other. And they can do a lot to work together to partner with business teams to understand where the risk is without them each needing to do that independently. So a shift to long-lived cross-functional safety teams is a success pattern. When you do this, you're pairing a safety team with one or more value streams, so long-lived cross-functional delivery units. And that enables some alignment of purpose and of objectives. So both teams start to have the objective of achieving Deepak, if you could go on mute, please, thank you. Both teams can have a shared purpose to deliver value safely. It's not a case of the safety team having the objective to uphold every policy and the delivery team with the objective to achieve lots of value. You have to be achieving value safely, and that's a goal of both sides. Both sides need to think pragmatically about how that will happen. So shared purpose, shared accountability. It's not that one side is responsible for safety and the other side is responsible for value. They're both responsible for value safely. Both sides can be customer aligned. Otherwise you can arrive at the cat and mouse situation where the value stream folk are trying to avoid and hide from the safety team folk and likewise. I've known information security professionals who withhold their phone number from the phone book because they don't want to be contacted. It's deliberately trying to make it hard to be got hold of. But actually that role is there to help guide and advise delivery teams about how to operate in a safe way. And when you start pairing these teams critically, you can increase context sensitivity. Instead of the colleagues in that safety team needing to understand the business of every part of a large organization, they can focus on understanding the business of a small part of the organization, just the value stream. So within that business context, there can be a much greater understanding of where are the real risks involved. Where do we need to focus? Where is the high risk change going on? The safety team can be part of the leadership of the value stream. It can be operating in the quarterly planning cycles as part of that group, listening out and collaborating and part of how change happens. So aligning governance, risk and compliance towards the value stream model is a pattern for success. Okay. And putting this together then through a minimum viable process, how does this really work? So I'm just going to talk you through a pattern that we found effective. It is a process, it's a process response, but it's the minimum viable process that we found to be necessary to ensure that those safety teams were able to collaborate with those product delivery teams in a way that was auditable and provable and robust. It was the minimum viable process that we were looking for. And many of you will know that with with your modern ways of working organization, there will be a funnel of business priorities, business outcomes, slices of value, which are being worked on. So this is the backlog, if you like, the funnel on its side, with prioritized slices of value in it. What it isn't is a backlog full of thousands of individual technical things, which nobody can understand. Actually, there is an implication in this approach that the product team, the delivery team, has clarity about the business value it is actually delivering. And that's a journey for them to come on. So we have slices of business value that are being worked on. As soon as the first slice of value is prioritized for action, before it's elaborated, before it's fully detailed with requirements or designs or anything like that, the product team is immediately engaging with their safety team. And the conversation is, dear safety team, there's a new business outcome we're focused on. This is what we know so far. Maybe very brief, maybe more substantial. That conversation, the purpose of that conversation is to say, based on what we know so far, how frequently do you think we should be talking to you at this stage? We want to let you know it's happening. How frequently do we need to talk to you? And the answer might be every day. This is you're trying to put a new payments portal up on the internet. Or it might be, this is a staff canteen application. We don't even need to talk to you, but thanks for letting us know. Might be just none at all. So there's an engagement frequency which can be discussed. And given that the safety team is always going to be small and low capacity compared to the delivery teams, there is always going to be a triage going on. So there will always need to be decisions taken about where should we focus. So that first conversation, dear safety team, this is what we're working on now. How frequently should we engage? Enabling that conversation to happen rather than 22 different questionnaires being completed. There is a product wiki, because in reality, the platforms, when I talk about product, by the way, I'm using it in the agile sense. So this is not the things that you sell typically. These are not the third-party license things you buy. These are the long-lived teams that you have that will configure, develop, and operate your platforms that support your business. So your product team, your long-lived product team, has a wiki. They have an architecture, a process architecture, a data architecture, a technical architecture, which evolves over time. And that data is needed. Those artifacts that they'll maintain are needed to operate the product. They're not just needed for governance, risk, and compliance purposes. They're needed for the team to actually understand and operate the product. So when the safety team is first engaged on a slice of value, the reference source is the product wiki. And it does need to be structured in a coherent way, but it doesn't need to have a new set of questionnaires loaded onto it, because that information is already there. From a safety team point of view, there may be an archaeology of standards and processes and policies across the organization. And those are typically written from the point of view of a compliance or a policy mindset, which is understandable, but it's not often so straightforward for a developer to understand what this thing means. So the safety team have a job to do to translate the policies of the organization into testable risk stories. Given the risk of malware, for example, let's say a new feature is being required that is pulling in some new customer data, the safety team might observe, given the risk of malware, we believe that some mitigation is required. These are the standard mitigations that we use, or you can innovate your own, but we will need to validate in the following way that that's going to be acceptable. So these risks, the risks that are embedded in your policies, standards, and procedures of the organization can be articulated as individual risk stories, slices of risk, which can then be pulled on to as response to a particular situation. So the product team flags we have a new business outcome. The safety team will be taking a look into their product wiki. Let's just remind ourselves, what is this product doing? What's the design? Okay, yes, it is. Is it dealing with this particular type of payments information? Yes, it is. Okay, we have a risk here. We've written it 5 times before. It's in our catalog of risks. They relate to our policies and procedures. So given this risk, we're going to pull this into your product team backlog, a risk story. We're going to customize it for your context with you at the whiteboard if necessary, because not all of the different mitigations are necessary. There will just be one mitigation path that you agree between you to follow. And that risk story can be sequenced in the release roadmap for the product team by the product owner ahead of when the risk presents itself. Now, as soon as that risk story is completed, you've immediately, through this process, you're starting to create visibility of where the risks are. Traditionally, the product teams may have been mitigating things anyway through the design work that they're doing, but the mitigations may not have been explicit. They'll have been embedded in the design that was created as opposed to explicit as stories with their own designs. And by itemizing out the risk stories, rather than treating it as implicit in how work is done, you're able to start taking a more nuanced approach about approvals and validation and any confirmation that's needed that, yes, in fact, this malware solution does meet standard. We are happy with it. Move on. So assigning that risk story into the backlog, getting the work done at an appropriate time and confirming it immediately with the safety team, that pattern of behavior starts to inject risk into the flow of work of the product team. And it means that when you get to release, there is no additional governance, safety, and compliance oversight needed. From a point of view of release, the only thing that needs to happen is to confirm that in this release, any risk stories that were raised have already been resolved. And providing they've already been resolved, this release can be you can follow a fully automated release approach. So you can be releasing on any cadence that you wish. The gateway, the check, the single gateway in this process is that release validation that all of the risks associated with this release have been fully resolved. And so this conversation at the engagement frequency that is set is a continuous everything type conversation. It allows continuous delivery. It's a continuous engagement between the product and the safety team. It's based around the flow of work of the product team and articulated in terms of risk stories. So there's quite a lot in this, and I can answer questions as you feel appropriate. Within this picture, there's around 24 different control points that are implied in here. What I'm doing with a number of organizations at the moment is just helping them understand where those control points are. And these control points are effectively things that teams do today to mitigate risk, which have not historically maybe been recognized or understood by governance, risk, and compliance teams. So just trying to translate the language of modern delivery into the language of governance, risk, and compliance, so that auditability is, can be present and established, is really what we're trying to establish here. And ultimately, that's enabling speed with control. So we're trying to be agile, not fragile. And we're trying to avoid a large inspection stage at the end, which would result in rework and waste. So building in risk mitigations from the outset. Okay, I'll pause there. Thank you, everyone.